For more on the budget pressures, inflation, JobSeeker and the other challenges, let's get some analysis with Economist Angela Jackson from Impact Economics and Policy. Angela, thank you for your time. I know you were part of a member of that committee, the Economic Inclusion Advisory Committee. What's your read on why JobSeeker needs to be increased to the level that you and your colleagues recommended to the government?
Look, Kieran, this is really about righting an historical wrong. So, since 1999, since about the turn of the century, the rate of job seeker simply hasn't kept up with the cost of living in Australia, and its real value has, as a result, deteriorated over time. And so what we're really talking about here is putting the rate of job seeker back to where it was at the turn of the century, which is at around 90% of the age pension. And in doing so, lifting, the million people, making their lives a lot easier as it's got increasingly hard to make ends meet on that payment.
So let's look at it from a few different angles. First of all, for those trying to find a job, what did the committee find in terms of where $49 a day leaves people in terms of trying to get things organised with their life, whether it be dressing properly or a haircut or looking after their kids?
Look, I think getting a haircut is pretty much impossible. Even if you look at simply housing costs, right, the rental costs in our major capital cities, the payment doesn't even meet those median housing costs, let alone food, let alone medicine, let alone, participating in the community or doing the types of things that many of us would simply take for granted. The payment is simply so low. And I think, your listeners and people watching today can understand that trying to live on $50 a day in this country at the moment is simply not doable. And so people have to cut corners. People have to not eat, every single meal. People have to skip medicines. And people can't undertake the sort of activities that would keep them participating in the community, that would improve their mental health and make them more likely to be able to find work.
This week we've been reporting on the inflation number. The RBA meets on the 2nd of May. Is it inflationary though? We know that every dollar in this is going to be spent. It's not like the people we're talking about are going to be able to put any of it aside. It's all going to be spent. So does that inflationary component need to be factored in by Jim Chalmers?
Look, there's certainly a balancing act here, and the International Monetary Fund itself has highlighted the need with governments at the moment to be careful about the amount they're spending, and certainly fiscal policy needs to be very tightly controlled. We don't want to add to the Reserve Bank's woes at the moment, that's for sure. But the thing to remember about this, of course, is that it's very tightly targeted at people. It's not like a widespread payment, so I wouldn't be sitting here today advocating, for a $250 or $500 payment to go to every household in Australia. That would be a terrible policy right now. This is a weekly payment. It tends to be less inflationary as a result. It's not sort of that stimulus payment that's a huge injection into the economy. And it needs to be balanced across in terms of the need that is there. The government also has obviously options in terms of how it implements an increase. Now, this problem has come about due to 30 years of policy failing. If the government wanted to outline a process over a number of years to bring this payment back up to being a livable amount, I think that would also be welcomed in the budget. So I think we can accept that there are a lot of things that they're trying to juggle right now, but that doesn't mean that we can ignore the plight of people trying to live on this payment.
The other thing, speaking of juggling, they're talking about is the single parenting payment. It was basically reduced during the Gillard government down from, I think it was 16 from memory, down to kids aged up to 8. There's some pressure on the government to return that payment to single parents. But if JobSeeker is increased sufficiently, does that make that other debate null and void, because those that move off the parenting payment go on to JobSeeker anyway?
Yeah, well, it certainly lowers the need. So there's no doubt that in terms of increasing the rate of JobSeeker would alleviate a lot of the issues facing single parents as their children get older. That payment, that age, was actually reduced under the John Howard's government. It was the Gillard government, however, who ended the arrangements whereby people who had been on the payment could stay on the payment. So there's a long history here with this payment, and I think most people could understand that, the needs to stay at home, particularly for single mothers when a child reaches 8 and their ability to work doesn't suddenly alleviate. And so there is, I think, a need to consider whether lifting the age with or without that increasing rate of JobSeeker would represent good policy in this instance. And it's good policy, Kieran, because what it does is it lifts children in particular out of poverty. We know the detrimental effect that poverty has on individuals in terms of their mental health and their capacity, but on children, it is absolutely devastating in terms of their educational outcomes, in terms of their lifelong outcomes. So investing in these families and in these kids and alleviating some of that financial pressure, it makes basic economic sense in terms of if we're trying to really lift future productivity in the economy, it's investing in these children today that makes the economic sense.
Angela Jackson from Impact Economics and Policy, thanks so much for your time and your insights. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Kieran.